Hello there, and welcome to the channel where science meets serenity. Tonight we're embarking on a journey back through time, but not the kind of journey that quickens your pulse or fills you with urgency. No, this is a gentle drift backward through millions of years into an era when the world moved at the pace of glaciers and life unfolded in slow, magnificent cycles that lasted longer than human civilization itself. We're exploring the Ice Age, but through the lens of wonder rather than worry, discovering the quiet marvels of a frozen world that shaped everything we know today. If you found your way here, you're probably someone who appreciates the intersection of learning and relaxation, where fascinating facts become a pathway to peaceful rest rather than restless curiosity. You might be settling in for the night, or perhaps you're seeking a gentle escape from the noise of modern life. Either way, you've come to the right place. Tonight's journey through the Ice Age will unfold like a slow river, carrying you through landscapes of ice and time, where every fact is chosen not just for its wonder, but for its ability to calm the mind and ease you toward rest. But before we begin our drift through frozen millennia, let me tell you what makes this exploration special. We're not just covering the Ice Age, we're discovering it through nearly 50 carefully chosen facts that reveal the surprising gentleness hidden within this seemingly harsh epoch. These aren't the dramatic tales of survival you might expect, but rather the quiet stories of adaptation, the slow dance of climate and life, and the peaceful rhythms that governed a world under ice. Each fact has been selected for its ability to inspire that particular kind of wonder that settles the mind rather than exciting it. What's more, this isn't just a collection of random information. These facts are woven together to tell a larger story, one that reveals how the Ice Age wasn't just a period of cold and hardship, but an era of remarkable beauty, adaptation, and even comfort. From the gentle giants that roamed frozen landscapes to the surprisingly cozy lives of early humans, from the slow sculpture of mountains by patient glaciers to the quiet communities that thrived in Ice Age valleys, we'll discover that this ancient world holds lessons in patience, resilience, and the art of finding warmth even in the coldest times. So settle back, let your breathing slow, and prepare to be carried away on a tide of gentle discovery. The Ice Age awaits, not as a harsh teacher, but as a patient storyteller, ready to share its quiet secrets with anyone willing to listen. The Ice Age wasn't really one age at all, but a series of gentle cycles that played out over millions of years like the world's slowest symphony. What we call the Ice Age was actually a collection of glacial periods, each lasting tens of thousands of years, separated by warmer intervals called interglacials. Picture the Earth breathing slowly, inhaling cold and exhaling warmth over and over again across vast stretches of time. These cycles were so gradual that a person living through them would never notice the change, like watching grass grow or mountains form. The ice advanced and retreated with of centuries the patience, reshaping continents one snowflake at a time. During the deepest glacial periods, ice sheets stretched across much of North America and Northern Europe, but they grew so slowly that entire generations of plants and animals had time to adapt and migrate. There was no sudden catastrophe, no dramatic freeze that caught life off guard. Instead, the cooling happened over thousands of years, giving forests time to shift southward, rivers time to find new paths, and creatures time to develop thicker coats or different feeding habits. It was adaptation at its most graceful, a slow dance between life and climate that created some of the most beautiful partnerships in natural history. The ice itself was not the harsh, brittle substance we might imagine, but something far more alive and flowing. Glacial ice forms gradually as layer upon layer of snow compacts over hundreds of years, creating a substance that moves like very slow honey. These massive ice sheets didn't just sit motionless on the landscape, they flowed like frozen rivers, carving valleys and polishing mountains with the gentleness of time itself. The pressure deep within these ice sheets was so immense that the ice at the bottom could actually melt and refreeze, creating a layer of lubrication that allowed the entire glacier to slide forward at the stately pace of a few feet per year. Woolly mammoths, perhaps the most famous residents of the Ice Age, were surprisingly well adapted to their frozen world. Far from struggling against the cold, they thrived in it. Their thick, shaggy coats weren't just for warmth, they were marvels of natural engineering. The outer layer of long guard hairs shed water and wind, while the dense undercoat trapped warm air close to their skin. Beneath this natural blanket, a layer of fat up to 4 inches thick provided additional insulation. Their ears were small compared to modern elephants, reducing heat loss, and their trunks were shorter and more muscular, perfect for clearing snow to reach the grasses beneath. These gentle giants lived in herds and showed remarkable social bonds. Fossil evidence suggests they cared for their sick and elderly, and there are sites where multiple generations of mammoths return to the same areas to die, creating natural graveyards that speak to their deep connection to place and family. Their diet consisted mainly of grasses, herbs, and shrubs, and they spent their days peacefully grazing across the vast steppes that stretched from Europe to North America. A single mammoth would consume about 300 pounds of vegetation per day, moving slowly across the landscape in search of the best feeding grounds. The Ice Age world was home to giant beavers that built dams not in rushing streams, but in the quiet ponds and marshes of a cooler world. These creatures, called castoroides, were the size of black bears, but retained the gentle, industrious nature of their smaller cousins. They lived in family groups and spent their days peacefully engineering their watery domains, creating habitats that supported countless other species. Their massive teeth could gnaw through trees 2 feet in diameter, but they used this power not for destruction, but for the careful construction of dams, lodges, and channels that turned frozen landscapes into thriving wetland communities. Saber-toothed cats, despite their fearsome reputation, were actually more patient hunters than the quick-strike predators we know today. Their famous elongated canines weren't designed for slashing attacks, but for precise, careful killing bites delivered only after their prey had been completely subdued. These cats were ambush hunters who would wait motionlessly for hours, watching and planning their approach. They lived in social groups and likely shared their kills, spending long periods resting and grooming between hunts. Their world was one of patience and precision, where success came not from frenzied activity, but from calm observation and perfect timing. The ice sheets themselves were like vast libraries, preserving information about ancient climates in their frozen layers. As snow fell year after year, each layer captured tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, creating a record of past climates that scientists can read like pages in a book. These ice cores reveal that the Ice Age world experienced surprisingly stable periods lasting thousands of years, with temperatures and precipitation patterns that remained remarkably consistent. During these stable periods, plant and animal communities had time to establish deep roots and complex relationships, creating ecosystems of stunning beauty and balance. Cave bears spent much of their lives not in the active pursuit we might expect, but in long, peaceful hibernations that could last up to 7 months. These enormous bears, larger than modern grizzlies, would gather in caves during the coldest months, sometimes in groups of dozens, and settle into a sleep so deep that their breathing would slow to just a few breaths per minute. Their caves became quiet sanctuaries where generations of bears would return year after year, wearing smooth paths in the stone with their massive paws. Some caves contain the remains of hundreds of cave bears, testament to the peaceful nature of these giants who chose rest over conflict. The Ice Age climate created vast grasslands called mammoth steppes that stretched across continents, supporting some of the largest herds of grazing animals the world has ever known. These weren't the harsh, windswept plains we might imagine, but rich, productive grasslands that remained green and lush even under snow. The cold, dry climate prevented trees from growing, but it was perfect for hardy grasses that could photosynthesize even at low temperatures. Herds of horses, bison, reindeer, and mammoths moved across these steppes in gentle migrations, following the seasons and the growth of fresh grass. The sound of their movement would have been like distant thunder, but peaceful thunder, the rhythm of thousands of hooves on soft earth. Early humans during the Ice Age developed remarkable skills for creating warmth and comfort in cold climates. They weren't struggling desperately against the elements, but had learned to work with the natural world to create cozy, efficient shelters. Some Ice Age homes were built partially underground, using the Earth's natural insulation to maintain comfortable temperatures even when the surface world was frozen. These homes were often arranged in small communities where families could share resources and stories during the long winter months. Archaeological evidence suggests these people had time for art, music, and elaborate rituals, indicating lives that were not just about survival, but about beauty, meaning, and social connection. The formation of glaciers happened so gradually that it created some of the most spectacular and peaceful geological processes on Earth. As snow accumulated in mountain valleys year after year, it slowly compacted into ice that began to flow downhill like a frozen river. This process carved valleys of breathtaking beauty, creating the dramatic landscapes we see in places like Yosemite and the Alps. But the carving happened so slowly that it was essentially invisible to any observer, taking place over thousands of years at a rate measured in inches per century. The glaciers polished granite cliffs to a mirror shine and carved perfect U-shaped valleys that would later become some of the world's most peaceful and beautiful places. Giant ground sloths, despite their enormous size, were peaceful herbivores who spent their days slowly foraging for leaves and fruits. Some species were as large as elephants, but they moved with deliberate, unhurried grace through forests and grasslands. Their massive claws, which might seem threatening, were actually perfect tools for pulling down high branches and stripping leaves with gentle precision. These creatures lived solitary lives or in small family groups, spending most of their time resting in the shade and moving only when necessary to find fresh food. Their fossilized remains are often found in natural shelters, suggesting they sought out comfortable, protected places to rest and raise their young. The Ice Age seas were home to gentle giants of their own, including massive walruses that gathered in peaceful colonies on ice floes and beaches. These social animals lived in communities that could number in the thousands, with complex hierarchies based not on aggression, but on age, experience, and social bonds. They spent their days diving to shallow ocean floors to dig for clams and other shellfish, using their sensitive whiskers to feel for food in the dark water. Between feeding sessions, they would haul out onto beaches or ice floes to rest in massive groups, their bodies pressed together for warmth and social comfort. The sound of a walrus colony was like a gentle symphony of grunts, snorts, and sighs, the peaceful communication of creatures perfectly adapted to their icy world. As we drift deeper into these Ice Age revelations, notice how each fact builds upon the last, painting a picture not of a world locked in struggle, but of a world moving at nature's own peaceful pace. The Ice Age teaches us that dramatic change doesn't require dramatic action, that adaptation can be gentle, and that even in the coldest times, life finds ways to create warmth, community, and beauty. These ancient rhythms still flow through our world today, reminding us that patience and persistence, rather than haste and force, are often the keys to thriving in any environment. But we've only begun to explore the gentle wonders of this frozen epoch. There are more stories to tell, more peaceful giants to meet, and more quiet marvels to discover as we continue our journey through the most relaxing Ice Age facts designed to carry you toward rest. The plants of the Ice Age world developed their own quiet strategies for surviving in cooler climates, creating some of the most beautiful and resilient botanical communities our planet has ever known. Cold-adapted trees like birches and spruces didn't fight against the frost but embraced it, developing waxy, needle-like leaves that could photosynthesize even when temperatures dropped below freezing. These forests grew slowly, taking decades to reach maturity, but once established, they created cathedral-like groves where the only sounds were the gentle whisper of wind through branches and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. Between the trees, carpets of mosses and lichens created living tapestries that could remain green and active even under blankets of snow, turning the forest floor into a soft, silent wonderland. Ice Age flowers bloomed with a patience that modern gardens have forgotten. Arctic poppies and cold-adapted daisies would wait through months of winter darkness, conserving their energy in underground bulbs and roots, then burst into color during the brief but intense growing seasons. These blooms were often more vibrant than their warm climate cousins, as if the long wait had concentrated their beauty into perfect, jewel-like petals. Entire meadows would transform overnight from brown, seemingly lifeless expanses into seas of purple, yellow, and white, creating moments of breathtaking beauty that lasted just a few precious weeks before giving way again to the peaceful dormancy of winter. The insects of the Ice Age developed perhaps the most remarkable adaptations of all, learning to slow their entire life cycles to match the unhurried pace of their frozen world. Many species spent the majority of their lives in extended dormancy, with some beetles and flies remaining inactive for years at a time, waiting for the perfect conditions to emerge and reproduce. When they did become active, it was with a purposeful efficiency that wasted no energy on unnecessary movement. Ice Age bees move slowly from flower to flower, taking time to thoroughly collect nectar and pollen before moving on. Their buzzing was lower and more rhythmic than modern bees, creating a gentle humming soundtrack to the brief summer seasons. Freshwater lakes during the Ice Age were crystal clear and incredibly deep, formed by the slow melting of glacial ice that had been purified over thousands of years. These pristine waters supported unique ecosystems of cold water fish that grew slowly but lived for decades. Arctic char and ancient species of trout moved through these waters with unhurried grace, their metabolism slowed by the cold to a pace that allowed them to live for 50 years or more. The lakes themselves were often perfectly still, reflecting the sky and surrounding mountains like natural mirrors. In winter, they froze with such clarity that you could see fish swimming beneath feet of solid ice, creating underwater worlds that remained active even when the surface world was locked in winter's embrace. The rivers of the Ice Age world carved their channels not through violent floods, but through the persistent, gentle work of meltwater that flowed year-round from the edges of glaciers. These streams ran clear and cold, carrying nutrients from the slowly eroding ice to support lush riverside communities of plants and animals. The sound of these rivers was different from modern waterways, deeper and more musical as they flowed over beds of smooth stones that had been polished by centuries of patient water. Fish runs flow in these rivers were spectacular but unhurried affairs, with salmon and other species moving upstream in massive schools that could stretch for miles. Their journey measured not in days but in weeks of steady, purposeful swimming systems during the Ice Age became underground. Caved sanctuaries where entire communities of animals rode out the harshest winter months in relative comfort. These weren't dark, forbidding places, but carefully chosen refuges where temperatures remained constant year-round, and water dripped steadily from limestone formations, creating natural fountains and pools. Cave bears, bats, and even some early humans shared these spaces peacefully, each species claiming its own section of the cave system. The walls of many Ice Age caves are decorated with mineral formations that grew slowly over millennia, creating natural cathedrals adorned with flowstone draperies and crystal gardens that sparkled in the dim light of fires and torches. The migration patterns of Ice Age animals were like slow continental breathing, with entire populations moving north and south in cycles that could span decades. Unlike the frantic migrations we see in modern wildlife, these ancient journeys were leisurely affairs where animals moved just a few miles each day, stopping frequently to rest and feed. Caribou herds would take months to complete migrations that modern herds finish in weeks, but this slower pace allowed them to thoroughly exploit food resources along their routes and maintain the health of pregnant mothers and young calves. The paths they carved became natural highways used by generation after generation, creating wildlife corridors that remained active for thousands of years. Early human settlements during the Ice Age were marvels of cozy engineering, designed not just for survival, but for comfort during the long winter months. These communities were often built in natural shelters like rock overhangs or partially underground with carefully constructed hearths that could burn continuously for months using slow-burning woods and bone fuel. The homes were furnished with soft furs and woven grasses, creating spaces so comfortable that archaeologists have found evidence of elaborate feasts, storytelling sessions, and artistic activities that took place during the darkest months of winter. Some sites show evidence of heated floors created by channeling warm air from fires through stone passages, an ancient form of radiant heating that kept living spaces comfortable even when temperatures outside dropped far below freezing. The formation of ice caves created some of the most spectacular and peaceful environments in the Ice Age world. As glaciers moved slowly across the landscape, meltwater would carve tunnels and chambers deep within the ice itself, creating temporary but magnificent galleries, decorated with ice formations of incredible beauty. These caves remained at a constant temperature just below freezing, making them surprisingly comfortable refuges for both animals and early humans. The walls would be lined with ice crystals that grew in delicate, fern-like patterns, and the sound within these caves was unlike anything else on Earth. A deep, resonant silence broken only by the occasional creak of shifting ice or the musical drip of slowly melting formations. Woolly rhinoceroses roamed the Ice Age steppes with the same unhurried dignity as their mammoth companions, but with an even more solitary and contemplative nature. These massive creatures, covered in thick reddish-brown fur, spent their days in quiet contemplation, using their broad lips to carefully select the most nutritious grasses and herbs from the vast meadows. Their horn, unlike the pointed weapons of modern rhinos, was flattened and curved, perfect for pushing aside snow to reach buried vegetation. They moved across the landscape in a meditative pace, sometimes standing motionless for hours as they surveyed their domain, their breathing creating small clouds in the cold air that dissipated slowly in the still atmosphere. The seasonal rhythms of the Ice Age world were stretched out like a gentle symphony played at half speed. Spring arrived not with a sudden burst of warmth, but with a gradual, almost imperceptible lifting of winter's grip that could take months to complete. The first signs weren't dramatic melting or rushing streams, but subtle changes like the return of bird songs that had been silent for half the year, or the appearance of tiny green shoots pushing through patches of snow. This slow transition gave all of life time to adjust gradually to changing conditions, preventing the shock and stress that rapid climate changes can cause. Plants had months to slowly increase their photosynthesis, animals had time to gradually shed their winter coats, and entire ecosystems could shift gears smoothly from winter dormancy to summer activity. Giant beavers weren't just larger versions of modern beavers, but represented an entirely different approach to aquatic engineering. While modern beavers create dams to control water flow, their Ice Age cousins built massive lodge complexes that could house extended family groups through the harsh winter months. These structures were marvels of insulation and comfort, with multiple chambers connected by underwater tunnels that remained ice-free even when surface waters froze solid. The lodges were furnished with soft bedding made from shredded bark and grasses, and had storage areas where families could keep caches of food to last through the long winter months. Some of these structures were so large and well built that they remained in use for decades, with generation after generation of giant beavers adding improvements and repairs. The Ice Age night sky was a canvas of unprecedented clarity and beauty, unmarred by any form of artificial light pollution. On clear nights, the aurora borealis danced across more of the northern hemisphere than it does today, creating spectacular light shows that could be seen as far south as present-day Spain and southern United States. These displays weren't brief, flickering events, but slow, majestic performances that could last for hours, painting the sky in gentle waves of green, blue, and purple light. Early humans and animals alike would have witnessed these cosmic ballets regularly, and many Ice Age cave paintings suggest that these light displays held deep spiritual significance for ancient peoples, who saw in them the breathing of the earth itself. The sounds of the Ice Age world created a natural symphony unlike anything heard today. Without human-made noise, the acoustic landscape was dominated by the gentle sounds of nature at its most peaceful. The dominant sound across much of the northern hemisphere was the slow, rhythmic creaking of ice sheets as they expanded and contracted with temperature changes. This deep bass note provided a constant but barely audible backdrop to daily life. Over this foundation played the gentler sounds of wind through grass, the soft footfalls of massive herds moving across steppes, the distant calls of birds, and the musical trickle of meltwater streams. At night, the world fell into a silence so complete that the sound of a breaking twig could carry for miles, and the breathing of sleeping animals created a gentle rhythm that matched the slow pulse of the frozen world itself. Human communities during this era developed sophisticated methods for creating light and warmth that sustained them through months of darkness. Oil lamps carved from stone burned slowly and steadily, fueled by rendered fat from mammoths and other large animals. These lamps produced a warm, golden light that could burn for days without refueling, and their gentle flames created cozy circles of illumination where eat families gathered to work and share stories. Some communities created elaborate systems of reflective surfaces using polished bone and stone to amplify and direct this precious light, turning simple shelters into warm, bright havens that remained comfortable even during the longest, darkest months of winter. As we continue our gentle drift through these Ice Age wonders, we begin to see a world that challenges every assumption about hardship and survival. This wasn't a world locked in struggle, but a world that had found its own perfect rhythm, a pace of life that allowed for deep adaptation, strong communities, and moments of incredible beauty. The lessons embedded in these ancient facts whisper to us across millennia, suggesting that perhaps the secret to thriving isn't in fighting against difficult circumstances, but in learning to move with them, to find the hidden comforts and unexpected joys that exist even in the most challenging times. The art of tool making during the Ice Age reveals a culture of patience and precision that modern craftspeople can barely imagine. Stone tools weren't hastily chipped into shape, but were carefully planned and executed over hours or even days of methodical work. Master tool makers would select stones with the care of a sculptor choosing marble, examining the grain and structure to envision the finished implement hidden within. The process of knapping or shaping stone through careful strikes became almost meditative, with experienced craftsmen able to predict exactly how each blow would travel through the stone. These tools were then used for years or even decades, carefully maintained and resharpened, passed down through generations as treasured family heirlooms that carried with them the accumulated wisdom of their makers. The Ice Age development of clothing represents one of humanity's most ingenious adaptations to cold climates, but it wasn't born from desperation, rather from careful observation and gradual refinement. Early humans learned to layer different materials, creating sophisticated insulation systems that rivaled modern outdoor gear. The innermost layer was often soft rabbit or bird skins worn with the fur against the skin, providing warmth and wicking moisture away from the body. Over this came thicker layers of deer or caribou hide, carefully tailored to allow freedom of movement while trapping warm air. The outermost layer was typically mammoth or bison hide, treated to be water-resistant and windproof. These garments were decorated with intricate beadwork and carved bone ornaments, showing that even practical clothing became an expression of artistry and cultural identity. Seasonal food preservation techniques developed during the Ice Age transformed the relationship between humans and their environment from one of constant foraging to one of planned abundance. The natural freezer of winter allowed communities to store vast quantities of meat from successful hunts, but they also developed sophisticated methods for preserving food during warmer months. Strips of meat were dried slowly in the cool, dry air, creating portable protein that could sustain travelers for weeks. Berries and nuts were mixed with rendered fat to create energy-rich cakes that remained fresh for months. Underground storage pits lined with stones and bark created natural refrigerators that kept foods cool even during summer months. These techniques allowed communities to plan elaborate feasts and ceremonies, creating social events that strengthened bonds and shared knowledge across extended family groups. The relationship between Ice Age humans and their animal companions was built on mutual benefit and deep understanding rather than domination. Early domestic dogs weren't just hunting partners, but full members of human communities who shared warmth during cold nights and provided companionship during long winter months. These dogs were bred not for specific tasks, but for temperament and loyalty, resulting in animals that were perfectly suited to the patient, contemplative lifestyle of their human families. Archaeological evidence suggests that dogs were buried with the same care and ceremony as human family members, and some sites show evidence of dogs being nursed back to health after injuries, indicating relationships based on genuine affection rather than mere utility. The social structures of Ice Age communities were remarkably egalitarian, with leadership based on wisdom and experience rather than force or accumulation of resources. Elders who had lived through multiple seasonal cycles were treasured repositories of knowledge about weather patterns, animal behavior, and survival techniques. These community leaders made decisions through long discussions that could span days, with every member of the group encouraged to contribute their perspective. Conflicts were resolved through storytelling and ritual rather than violence, with elaborate ceremonies designed to restore harmony and strengthen social bonds. The archaeological record shows very little evidence of warfare or violence between groups, suggesting that cooperation and mutual aid were the dominant form of social organization, not organizing principles of Ice Age society. The artistic achievements of Ice Age peoples reveal minds that had abundant time for creative expression and spiritual contemplation. Cave paintings weren't crude survival documentation, but sophisticated artistic works that took months or years to complete. Artists would return to the same cave walls again and again, adding layers of imagery that created complex narratives about the relationship between humans and the natural world. These paintings were often created in the deepest, most difficult to reach parts of caves, suggesting they held profound spiritual significance and were worth tremendous effort to create. The pigments themselves were carefully prepared from mineral compounds that had to be gathered from distant locations, ground with stone tools, and mixed with animal fats to create paints that would remain vivid for thousands of years. Musical traditions during the Ice Age created the first human soundtracks to accompany the rhythms of seasonal life. Bone flutes carved from mammoth and bird bones produced haunting melodies that could carry across vast distances, serving as communication tools as well as entertainment. Drums made from stretched hides created deep, resonant beats that matched the slow pulse of Ice Age life, and rattles made from dried gourds and stones provided rhythmic accompaniment to ceremonies and celebrations. These musical gatherings often lasted for days, with entire communities participating in elaborate performances that combined music, dance, and storytelling. The acoustics of caves were carefully studied and utilized, with musicians positioning themselves in natural amphitheaters where their music would resonate and amplify, creating immersive sound experiences that connected performers and audiences to the living rock around them. The healing traditions of Ice Age peoples combined practical medicine with spiritual practices, creating holistic approaches to health and well-being that addressed both physical and emotional needs. Herbal medicines were carefully prepared from plants that had been observed and tested over generations, with knowledge of their properties passed down through specialized healers who served as both doctors and spiritual advisors. These healers understood that recovery required not just physical treatment, but also emotional and social support, leading to healing ceremonies that involved entire communities in the restoration of individual health. Massage techniques using warm stones and aromatic plant oils helped maintain physical comfort during long periods of reduced activity, while meditation and breathing practices helped manage the psychological challenges of surviving in harsh environments. The astronomical observations of Ice Age peoples reveal sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles and their relationship to earthly seasons. Without artificial light to obscure the night sky, ancient observers could track the movements of stars and planets with remarkable precision, creating mental calendars that guided hunting, gathering, and migration decisions. The positions of constellations were memorized through elaborate stories that served as both entertainment and practical education, with star patterns providing navigation aids for long-distance travel. Lunar cycles were particularly important, with the phases of the moon serving as natural timekeepers for planning activities and ceremonies. Some Ice Age sites show evidence of stone arrangements that served as primitive observatories, allowing communities to predict solstices, equinoxes, and other astronomical events with accuracy that wouldn't be matched again until the development of modern science. Childcare practices during the Ice Age created some of the most nurturing environments in human history, with entire communities participating in the raising and education of young people. Children weren't separated from adult activities, but were gradually introduced to all aspects of community life, learning through observation and gentle participation rather than formal instruction. Extended family groups ensured that children always had multiple caregivers and teachers, creating support systems that could adapt to any circumstance. Play was recognized as essential for development, with adults crafting elaborate toys and games that taught important skills while providing entertainment during long winter months. Coming-of-age ceremonies marked the transition to adulthood, with celebrations that could last for weeks. Recognizing the investment the entire community had made in each young person's development, the spiritual beliefs of Ice Age peoples were deeply connected to the natural world around them, with religious practices that celebrated the interconnectedness of all living things. Sacred sites were often chosen for their natural beauty and acoustic properties, with ceremonies tans and spiritualized to coincide with seasonal changes and astronomical events. Sham leaders served as intermediaries between the human and natural worlds, using trance states and ritual performances to commune with animal spirits and natural forces. These spiritual practices weren't separate from daily life, but were woven into every aspect of existence, from hunting rituals that honored animal spirits to planting ceremonies that celebrated the return of growing seasons. Death was seen not as an ending, but as a transformation, with elaborate burial practices that prepared individuals for their journey to the next world, while providing comfort and closure for grieving communities. The engineering achievements of Ice Age peoples extended far beyond simple shelters to include sophisticated infrastructure that supported thriving communities. Drainage systems channeled meltwater away from living areas while directing it toward areas where it could be stored for later use. Carefully planned walking paths connected different areas of settlements while minimizing erosion and maintaining access during all weather conditions. Food storage facilities were designed with multiple levels of protection against both weather and scavengers, using principles of ventilation and moisture control that kept stored supplies fresh for months. These engineering solutions weren't imposed on the landscape, but worked with natural features to create sustainable systems that could be maintained with minimal effort while providing maximum benefit to community life. The trading networks of the communities through peaceful exchange of goods, Ice Age world stretched across continents, connecting distant knowledge and cultural practices. Amber from northern coastlines found its way to settlements hundreds of miles inland, while obsidian for tool-making traveled even greater distances from volcanic regions to communities that prized its sharp edges and beautiful appearance. These trade routes weren't just commercial networks, but cultural highways that spread innovations in art, technology, and spiritual practices across vast distances. Trading expeditions were major community events that could take months to complete, with travelers carrying not just goods, but stories, songs, and news from distant places. The hospitality extended to traders created bonds between communities that lasted for generations, forming alliances that provided mutual support during difficult times. As these gentle facts continue to unfold, we discover that the Ice Age world was not a place of isolation and hardship, but a connected, creative, and deeply human environment where communities thrived through cooperation, patience, and profound connection to the natural world. The pace of life allowed for deep relationships, careful craftsmanship, and spiritual practices that nurtured both individual growth and community well-being. These ancient rhythms still echo in quiet moments of modern life, reminding us that there are other ways to live, other rhythms to follow, and other definitions of success and prosperity than the hurried accumulation that characterizes so much of contemporary existence. The relationship between Ice Age communities and their environment was marked by a profound understanding of natural cycles that modern society has largely forgotten. These ancient peoples didn't fight against winter, but embraced it as a time of reflection, storytelling, and deep community bonding. The long months of darkness weren't endured, but celebrated as opportunities for spiritual growth and artistic expression. Families would gather around central hearths for weeks at a time, sharing meals that had been prepared with ingredients gathered throughout the previous seasons. The conversations that took place during these extended gatherings were unhurried and thorough, allowing for the kind of deep communication that builds lasting relationships and passes wisdom from one generation to the next. Sleep patterns during the Ice Age followed natural rhythms that aligned perfectly with seasonal changes and the availability of light. During the shortest days of winter, communities would naturally shift into longer periods of rest, sometimes sleeping for 12 or more hours at a stretch. This wasn't seen as laziness, but as a natural adaptation that conserved energy and allowed bodies to recover from the physical demands of survival in cold climates. Dream practices were highly developed, with communities sharing and interpreting dreams as sources of guidance and spiritual insight. Some cultures developed elaborate rituals around sleep and dreaming, creating comfortable sleeping areas decorated with meaningful symbols and blessed with herbs that promoted peaceful rest and vivid prophetic dreams. The development of textiles during the Ice Age represents one of humanity's most sophisticated technological achievements, born from necessity but refined through generations of patient experimentation. Fibers were carefully harvested from plants that had been identified through careful observation and testing, with different materials chosen for specific properties like strength, softness, or water resistance. The process of creating thread from these fibers was meditative work that often took place during community gatherings, with skilled craftspeople teaching younger members while stories were shared and songs were sung. Looms were constructed from materials readily available in the environment, but their design required deep understanding of tension, spacing, and rhythm that took years to master. The resulting textiles weren't just functional, but were works of art that expressed cultural identity and personal creativity through intricate patterns and color combinations. Fire management during the Ice Age was elevated to an art form that sustained communities through the longest and coldest periods of the year. Master firekeepers could maintain blazes that burned continuously for months using carefully selected combinations of wood, bone, and fat that produced steady heat with minimal smoke. These fires weren't just sources of warmth, but were the social and spiritual centers of community life, with specific rituals governing who could tend the flames and how they should be maintained. The knowledge of firemaking was considered sacred wisdom, passed down through apprenticeships that could last for years, and involved not just technical skills, but spiritual understanding of fire's role in maintaining the balance between human communities and the natural world. Ice Age communities developed sophisticated methods for processing and preparing plant foods that maximized nutrition while creating flavors that made simple ingredients into satisfying meals. Grinding stones were carefully shaped and maintained, with different textures created for processing different types of seeds, nuts, and dried fruits. Fermentation techniques were discovered and refined, creating preserved foods that were not only nutritious, but provided beneficial bacteria that supported digestive health during long periods when fresh foods were unavailable. Cooking methods were varied and creative, with underground ovens that could slow cook tough meats for days, steaming techniques that preserved nutrients in vegetables, and smoking methods that added complex flavors while preserving foods for extended storage. The oral traditions of Ice Age peoples created vast libraries of knowledge that were carried in memory rather than written down, with stories that served multiple purposes as entertainment, education, and historical record. Master storytellers trained for decades to memorize thousands of tales, each one carefully constructed to teach specific lessons about survival, morality, and the relationship between humans and nature. These stories weren't just recited, but were performed with elaborate gestures, voice changes, and dramatic pauses that brought characters to life and held audiences spellbound for hours. The accuracy of oral transmission was ensured through repetition and cross-checking, with multiple storytellers in each community responsible for maintaining different aspects of the cultural knowledge base. Weather prediction during the Ice Age was based on careful observation of subtle environmental cues that modern meteorology has only recently begun to understand. Experienced weather watchers could predict storms days in advance by observing the behavior of animals, the color and movement of clouds, the direction of winds, and even the scents carried on the air. This knowledge was crucial for survival, allowing communities to prepare for severe weather by securing shelters, gathering firewood, and ensuring adequate food supplies. The most skilled weather predictors were revered members of their communities, with their knowledge sought not just for practical purposes, but for the spiritual insight that came from such deep connection to natural forces. The architecture of Ice Age shelters reflected sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics, structural engineering, and human comfort that rivals modern building techniques. Entrances were designed with multiple barriers that prevented cold air from reaching living spaces while allowing fresh air to circulate. Interior layouts maximize the efficiency of heating systems while creating separate areas for different activities like cooking, sleeping, working, and socializing. Construction materials were chosen not just for availability, but for specific properties like insulation value, durability, and ease of repair. Some structures incorporated passive solar heating with openings positioned to capture maximum sunlight during brief winter days while cold nights. The transportation, preventing heat loss during long methods developed during the Ice Age were marvels of efficiency and comfort that allowed communities to move substantial distances while carrying everything necessary for survival. Sleds weren't crude contraptions, but carefully engineered vehicles with flexible joints that could navigate rough terrain while protecting their cargo from damage. Dog harnesses were designed to distribute weight evenly while allowing maximum pulling power with minimum strain on the animals. Snowshoes were crafted with different designs for different types of snow and terrain, with master craftsmen able to create footwear that provided perfect flotation and traction for specific conditions. Travel routes were carefully planned to take advantage of natural shelters and food sources, with detailed knowledge of distances, terrain, and seasonal conditions passed down through generations of experienced travelers. The social ceremonies of Ice Age communities created elaborate celebrations that could last for weeks and involved entire extended families in joyous gatherings that strengthened bonds and renewed cultural traditions. Marriage ceremonies weren't brief exchanges of vows, but extended festivals that celebrated not just the union of two individuals, but the joining of family groups and the continuation of cultural lines. Birth celebrations honored new life with rituals that welcomed children into the community while acknowledging their connection to ancestors and natural spirits. Seasonal ceremonies marked important transitions in the annual cycle, with gatherings that combined feasting, dancing, storytelling, and spiritual observances that reinforced the community's relationship with the natural world. The musical instruments created during the Ice Age produced sounds that were perfectly suited to the acoustic environments where they were played, with flutes designed to resonate in specific cave chambers and drums tuned to carry across vast open landscapes. Craftsmen who specialized in instrument making understood the relationship between materials, construction techniques, and sound production in ways that created instruments of remarkable beauty and functionality. These weren't crude noisemakers, but sophisticated musical tools that could produce complex melodies and rhythms capable of expressing the full range of human emotion. Musical performances were often combined with dance and visual art to create immersive experiences that transported participants into altered states of consciousness, where spiritual insight and community bonding could occur. The games and recreational activities of Ice Age peoples provided entertainment during long periods of enforced indoor living, while teaching skills that were essential for survival and social cooperation. Board games carved from wood and bone required strategic thinking and planning that developed mental abilities useful in hunting and resource management. Physical games and competitions maintained fitness levels during periods of reduced activity while creating opportunities for social interaction and friendly rivalry. Storytelling games challenge participants to create entertaining narratives while preserving cultural knowledge and moral teachings. These recreational activities weren't just ways to pass time, but were integral parts of education and social development that prepared community members for the challenges and responsibilities of adult life. The healing practices of Ice Age communities recognized that health was not just the absence of disease, but a state of harmony between individual, community, and natural environment. Healers understood that physical symptoms often reflected spiritual or emotional imbalances that required holistic treatment addressing all aspects of a person's well-being. Treatment methods combined herbal medicines with massage, energy work, counseling, and spiritual practices that engaged the patient's own healing abilities rather than simply imposing external remedies. Recovery was seen as a community responsibility, with entire groups participating in healing ceremonies and providing ongoing support that ensured not just physical recovery, but complete reintegration into social and spiritual life. The leadership structures of Ice Age communities were based on consensus and wisdom rather than authority and control, with decisions made through patient discussion that continued until agreement was reached. Leaders weren't rulers, but facilitators who guided communities through decision-making processes that honored everyone's perspective while ensuring that choices reflected the collective wisdom of the group. These leaders were often individuals who had demonstrated exceptional knowledge, fairness, and concern for community welfare over many years of service. Their authority came not from position, but from earned respect, and they could lose their leadership role if they failed to maintain the trust and confidence of their communities. The agricultural practices of late Ice Age peoples represented the beginning of humanity's transition from hunting and gathering to food production. But this transition happened gradually over thousands of years as communities slowly learned to encourage the growth of well-provided food and materials. Vast plants that early farmers didn't clear large fields but worked with natural plant communities to increase their productivity through careful burning, selective harvesting, and protection of valuable species. Seeds were saved and replanted not in formal gardens, but in natural areas where conditions were favorable for growth. This approach to food, the diversitied production maintain of natural and stability ecosystems, while gradually increasing the reliability of food supplies. The artistic traditions of Ice Age communities created works that served not just as decoration, but as spiritual tools that connected humans to the natural world and to each other. Sculptures weren't just representations, but were believed to contain spiritual essence that could provide protection, guidance, or connection to animal spirits. Paintings served as meditation focuses that helped viewers achieve altered states of consciousness where spiritual insight could occur. Jewelry and personal adornments weren't just fashion statements, but were amulets and talismans that provided spiritual protection and identified the wearer's role within the community. These artistic works were created with materials gathered from sacred places and were blessed through ceremonies that imbued them with spiritual power. The waste management practices of Ice Age communities were based on complete utilization of all available resources, with nothing discarded that could serve any useful purpose. Organic waste was composted to enrich soil for plant cultivation, while bones and other hard materials were shaped into tools, weapons, and decorative objects. Even human waste was managed in ways that prevented contamination of water supplies while returning nutrients to the soil. This approach to resource use wasn't just practical, but reflected spiritual beliefs about the interconnectedness of all things and the responsibility of humans to maintain harmony with natural cycles. Communities that practiced these principles could maintain stable populations in the same areas for hundreds or thousands of years without depleting their resource base. The navigation techniques developed by Ice Age travelers allowed them to cross vast distances without modern instruments while maintaining accurate knowledge of their location and destination. Star patterns were memorized not just as individual constellations, but as part of dynamic sky maps that showed how celestial positions change throughout the night and across seasons. Landscape features were studied and remembered in intricate detail, with travelers able to recognize specific rocks, trees, and terrain formations that served as waypoints on long journeys. Wind patterns, animal behaviors, and plant growth were all used as navigational aids that provided constantly updated information about direction, weather, and seasonal changes. As these gentle revelations continue to unfold, we discover that every aspect of Ice Age life was infused with patience, wisdom, and deep connection to natural rhythms that supported not just survival, but flourishing human communities. The pace of this ancient world allowed for the development of skills, relationships, and spiritual practices that created lives of remarkable richness and meaning. These timeless approaches to living remain accessible to us today, offering quiet lessons about finding contentment through connection, meaning through mindfulness, and prosperity through harmony with the natural world that still surrounds us, even in our modern environment. The daily routines of Ice Age communities moved with the unhurried rhythm of natural time, where activities were governed not by artificial schedules, but by the gentle progression of light, weather, and seasonal needs. Morning didn't begin with jarring alarms, but with the gradual awakening that came naturally as bodies responded to subtle changes in temperature and light filtering through shelter openings. The first person to wake would quietly tend the fire, adding fuel with practiced silence to avoid disturbing others who might still be deep in restorative sleep. This early morning time was often spent in peaceful reflection, watching the flames dance while listening to the soft breathing of family members and the distant sounds of the waking world outside. Breakfast preparation was an unhurried ritual that could take hours, not from inefficiency, but from the meditative attention given to each step of the process. Grains that had been soaking overnight were slowly ground into meal, with the rhythmic sound of stone against stone creating a gentle percussion that marked the beginning of each day. Dried meats were carefully selected and prepared, while stored fruits and nuts were sorted and combined into nourishing mixtures that would provide sustained energy for the day's activities. The cooking process itself was a form of meditation, with experienced cooks able to judge the perfect moment for adding ingredients or adjusting heat through senses honed by years of practice. Work activities during the Ice Age were approached as opportunities for skill development and social connection, rather than mere labor to be endured. Tool-making sessions often became community gatherings where master craftsmen would demonstrate techniques, while apprentices watched and gradually participated under gentle guidance. The creation of a single spear point might take an entire afternoon, but the time was filled with conversation, instruction, and the deep satisfaction that comes from working with natural materials to create something both beautiful and functional. These work sessions were punctuated by frequent breaks for storytelling, sharing food, or simply resting in comfortable silence while hands continued their patient work. The preparation of clothing during the Ice Age represented some of humanity's most sophisticated textile work, with garments that were not just functional but represented months or even years of careful craftsmanship. The process began with the selection of skins, with experienced hunters and craftspeople able to identify hides that would provide the perfect combination of warmth, flexibility, and durability. Tanning processes were elaborate procedures that required precise timing and careful attention to detail, with hides soaked in carefully prepared solutions for days or weeks before being stretched, scraped, and treated with natural oils that would keep them soft and pliable in cold weather. Sewing techniques developed during this era produced garments of remarkable sophistication, with seams that were not just functional but decorative, incorporating patterns and designs that identified the wearer's family group and social status. Needles carved from bone were treasured tools that were often passed down through generations, with the most skilled seamstresses able to create stitches so fine and even that they resembled machine work. Thread was created from sinew, plant fibers, or hair that had been carefully prepared and twisted into strong, flexible strands that could withstand the stresses of daily wear while maintaining their appearance for years. The decoration of Ice Age clothing incorporated materials gathered from across vast territories, with beads made from shells that had traveled hundreds of miles from distant coastlines, stones selected for their perfect color and shape from mountain regions, and carved bone ornaments that represented hundreds of hours of detailed work. These decorative elements weren't just ornamental, but served as markers of identity, achievement, and spiritual protection. The process of creating decorated clothing was often a community effort, with different individuals contributing their specialized skills to produce garments that were true works of art. Footwear during the Ice Age was engineered with the sophistication that matched the demands of traveling across diverse and challenging terrain, while providing comfort during long periods of wear. Different types of shoes were created for different conditions, with soft moccasins for indoor wear, sturdy boots for rough terrain, and specialized footwear for walking on snow and ice. The construction of these shoes involved multiple layers of materials, each chosen for specific properties like water resistance, insulation, or flexibility. The soles were often reinforced with additional layers of tough hide or even carved wooden inserts that provided protection from sharp rocks while maintaining the flexibility needed for comfortable walking. The social aspects of clothing creation turned what could have been solitary work into opportunities for building relationships and sharing knowledge across generations. Sewing circles brought together individuals of all ages, with experienced craftspeople teaching techniques to younger members while sharing stories and songs that made the work enjoyable and meaningful. These gatherings often lasted for days, with participants sharing meals and continuing their work by firelight long into the evening. The clothing created during these social work sessions carried with it not just the technical skill of its makers, but the warmth of community connection and shared purpose. Storage solutions developed by Ice Age communities were marvels of engineering that protected valuable resources from weather, pests, and spoilage while remaining accessible when needed. Underground caches were carefully constructed with multiple layers of protection, including stone linings that prevented moisture intrusion, tight-fitting covers that excluded insects and small animals, and careful positioning that took advantage of natural drainage patterns. These storage systems were often hidden and marked with subtle signs that could be recognized by community members but would remain invisible to outsiders. Above-ground storage structures were equally sophisticated, with raised platforms that protected goods from ground moisture and flooding, walls constructed from materials that provided insulation while allowing air circulation, and roofing systems that shed water while preventing snow accumulation. The interior organization of these storage areas reflected deep understanding of how different materials aged and interacted, with foods arranged to maximize preservation, while tools and other goods were positioned for easy access and inventory management. The preservation techniques used for different types of foods required specialized knowledge that was developed over generations of careful observation and experimentation. Meat preservation involved not just drying and smoking, but complex processes that could create foods with different textures, flavors, and storage characteristics. Some techniques produced jerky-like products that were lightweight and portable, while others created preserved meats that retained much of their original texture and could be stored for months without deterioration. Fish preservation involved different techniques entirely, with methods that could create products ranging from delicate smoked fillets to protein-rich pastes that could sustain travelers for weeks. Plant food preservation was equally sophisticated, with different techniques developed for different types of fruits, nuts, seeds, and roots. Some methods involved careful drying that concentrated flavors while extending storage life, while others used fermentation processes that not only preserved foods but enhanced their nutritional value and created complex, satisfying flavors. Root vegetables were stored in underground chambers where temperature and humidity could be controlled to prevent both freezing and spoilage, while seeds and nuts were treated with natural preservatives that prevented insect damage and rancidity. The organization of daily meals during the Ice Age reflected both nutritional wisdom and social customs that strengthened community bonds while ensuring that everyone received adequate nourishment. Breakfast was typically a light meal designed to provide energy for morning activities without causing the drowsiness that could come from heavy eating. The selection of morning foods was based on careful observation of how different combinations of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates affected energy levels and mental clarity throughout the day. Midday meals were often shared experiences that brought work groups together for both nourishment and social connection. These meals were planned to provide sustained energy for afternoon activities while offering opportunities for community members to share news, discuss challenges, and coordinate future activities. The preparation of midday meals was often a collaborative effort, with different individuals contributing ingredients and skills to create satisfying and nutritious combinations. Evening meals were the most elaborate and social of daily food experiences, with preparations that could begin hours before the meal was served. These dinners were opportunities for entire communities to gather, share the day's experiences, and strengthen social bonds through the shared pleasure of good food and comfortable companionship. The evening meal often extended well into the night, with eating, conversation, and entertainment blending together in relaxed celebrations of community life. Food sharing customs during the Ice Age created networks of reciprocity and mutual support that ensured no individual or family ever faced hunger alone. These customs weren't just practical arrangements, but reflected deep spiritual beliefs about the interconnectedness of all community members and the responsibility of each person to contribute to the welfare of others. Successful hunters were expected to share their catch with those less fortunate, while skilled gatherers distributed their finds according to complex social protocols that ensured equitable distribution while maintaining incentives for individual effort. The seasonal variations in Ice Age diets reflected sophisticated understanding of how different foods affected health and well-being under changing environmental conditions. Winter diets emphasized foods that provided sustained energy and supported immune function during periods of cold stress and reduced activity levels. These diets were rich in preserved meats, stored fats, and fermented plant foods that provided essential nutrients, while creating feelings of warmth and satisfaction that supported psychological well-being during the darkest months of the year. Spring diets focused on foods that supported renewed activity levels and helped bodies recover from winter's demands while taking advantage of fresh plant foods that provided essential vitamins and minerals, often lacking in preserved foods. The transition from winter to spring eating patterns was managed carefully, with gradual changes that allowed digestive systems to adjust, while preventing the stomach problems that could result from sudden dietary changes. Summer and autumn eating patterns emphasized fresh foods that provided peak nutrition while preparing bodies for the challenges of the coming winter months. These seasons were times of abundance when communities could enjoy the luxury of variety and freshness, while also focusing on gathering and preserving foods that would sustain them through less productive periods. The work of food preparation during these seasons was intensive but joyful, with entire communities participating in harvesting, processing, and preservation activities that were as much social celebrations as practical necessities. The medicinal use of foods during the Ice Age reflected deep understanding of how different nutrients and natural compounds affected health and healing. Certain combinations of foods were prescribed for specific health conditions, with experienced healers able to create dietary treatments that supported recovery from illness while strengthening overall health and resilience. These food medicines weren't just nutritional supplements, but were prepared with spiritual practices that were believed to enhance their healing properties. The preparation of medicinal foods often involved elaborate processes that concentrated active compounds while removing potentially harmful elements. Teas and broths were prepared from plants that had been carefully harvested at specific times and dried under controlled conditions to preserve their therapeutic properties. These preparations were often combined with other foods to create complete meals that provided both nutrition and medicine, making treatment a pleasant and nourishing experience rather than an unpleasant necessity. The social aspects of medicinal eating created support networks that helped individuals recover from illness, while strengthening community bonds through shared concern and care. Family members and friends participated in gathering ingredients, preparing special foods, and providing companionship during recovery periods. These healing communities understood that recovery required not just physical treatment, but emotional and social support that helped individuals feel valued and connected during vulnerable times. As we drift deeper into these gentle revelations about Ice Age life, we discover a world where every activity was infused with mindfulness, community connection, and deep respect for natural rhythms. The pace of daily life allowed for the kind of careful attention to detail that created not just survival but true prosperity. where communities thrived through cooperation, wisdom, and patient adaptation to their environment. These ancient approaches to living offer quiet lessons that remain relevant today, suggesting ways we might find greater satisfaction and meaning through slowing down, paying attention, and reconnecting with the natural rhythms that still govern our world, even in our fast-paced modern lives. The construction of Ice Age homes represents one of humanity's most ingenious adaptations to challenging environments. But these weren't desperate shelters hastily thrown together against the cold. Instead, they were carefully planned residences that provided genuine comfort and warmth through sophisticated design principles that modern architects are only beginning to rediscover. The positioning of these homes took advantage of natural windbreaks and solar exposure, with entrances oriented to minimize heat loss while maximizing the capture of precious winter sunlight. Interior layouts were designed with multiple zones that serve different functions while maintaining efficient heat distribution throughout the living space. The walls of Ice Age homes were often constructed using a combination of materials that provided exceptional insulation while remaining structurally sound under the weight of snow and the pressure of freeze-thaw cycles. Mammoth bones formed the framework for many structures, not because wood wasn't available, but because these massive bones provided superior strength and durability while creating architectural elements of stunning beauty. The spaces between bone framework were filled with carefully layered materials including animal hides, dried grasses, and earth, creating composite walls that could maintain comfortable interior temperatures even when outside conditions were far below freezing. Heating systems developed levels of efficiency during this era that provided warmth with minimal fuel consumption, while maintaining air quality that supported health and comfort during long periods of indoor living. Central hearths were positioned to maximize heat distribution while minimizing smoke accumulation, with carefully designed ventilation systems that drew fresh air into living spaces while exhausting combustion products through natural draft systems. Some homes incorporated heated floors created by channeling warm air from fires through stone-lined passages, providing radiant warmth that heated occupants from below while maintaining comfortable air temperatures throughout the structure. The interior furnishing of Ice Age homes created comfortable living environments that supported all the activities necessary for community life during extended periods of cold weather confinement. Sleeping areas were designed with raised platforms that provided insulation from ground cold while creating cozy alcoves that could be warmed with heated stones or small braziers. Work areas were positioned to take advantage of natural light from openings while providing comfortable seating and work surfaces for activities like tool making, food preparation, and textile work. Storage solutions within Ice Age homes were integrated into the architecture in ways that maximized space efficiency while protecting valuable resources from temperature fluctuations and pest intrusion. Built-in storage alcoves were lined with materials that provided insulation and moisture control, while removable covers allowed easy access to stored goods. Food storage areas were positioned to maintain optimal temperatures for different types of preserved foods, with root cellars that remained cool during summer months and elevated storage areas that prevented freezing during winter cold snaps. The lighting systems used in Ice Age homes created warm, comfortable environments that supported evening activities while conserving precious fuel resources. Stone oil lamps were positioned strategically throughout living spaces to provide adequate illumination for detailed work while creating intimate gathering areas where families could share meals and stories. reflective surfaces made from polished bone and metal concentrated and directed light where it was most needed, while carefully positioned openings allowed natural light to penetrate deep into interior spaces during daylight hours. The social organization of Ice Age homes reflected family structures that supported multiple generations while providing privacy and personal space for individual family members. Multi-room layouts created separate areas for different age groups and activities, while central gathering spaces brought families together for meals, celebrations, and community decision-making. These homes weren't just shelters, but were designed as social environments that strengthened family bonds while supporting the complex relationships that held Ice Age communities together. Maintenance of Ice Age homes was an ongoing community effort that involved specialized knowledge and seasonal activities designed to keep structures in optimal condition year-round. Spring maintenance focused on repairing damage from winter weather while preparing homes for increased activity during warmer months. Summer work involved gathering and preparing materials needed for winter repairs, while autumn maintenance prepared structures for the coming cold season with additional insulation and weatherproofing. The construction techniques used to build Ice Age homes required specialized skills that were passed down through generations of master builders who understood the complex relationships between materials, climate, and human comfort. These builders could evaluate different materials for their insulation properties, structural strength, and durability under specific environmental conditions. Their knowledge extended beyond mere construction to include understanding of how different building techniques affected air quality, moisture control, and the psychological well-being of occupants during long periods of indoor living. The tools used in Ice Age construction were specialized instruments that had been refined over generations to perform specific tasks with maximum efficiency and precision. Stone cutting tools were shaped to work with different types of rock and bone, while wooden implements were designed to shape and position materials with accuracy that ensured tight joints and weather-resistant construction. These tools weren't just functional implements, but were often decorated with carvings and designs that reflected their importance in community life and the skill of their makers. Transportation methods during the Ice Age evolved into sophisticated systems that allowed communities to move substantial distances while carrying everything necessary for establishing new settlements. Specialized sleds were designed for different types of cargo, with some optimized for transporting construction materials, while others were built for carrying family possessions and supplies. Dog teams were trained not just to pull loads, but to navigate specific types of terrain and respond to commands that allowed for precise maneuvering in difficult conditions. Travel routes during the Ice Age became well-established pathways that connected distant communities while providing access to seasonal resources and trading opportunities. These routes weren't just practical transportation corridors, but were cultural highways that facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and social practices across vast distances. The maintenance of these routes was a community responsibility that involved clearing obstacles, marking dangerous areas, and establishing supply caches that could support travelers during long journeys. The seasonal migration patterns of Ice Age communities followed ancient rhythms that balanced resource availability with environmental comfort while maintaining social connections across extended family networks. These migrations weren't desperate flights from harsh conditions, but were planned movements that took advantage of seasonal abundance while avoiding periods of resource scarcity. The timing of these movements was based on careful observation of natural indicators that predicted weather changes and resource availability weeks or months in advance. Temporary shelters used during migrations were designed for rapid assembly and disassembly, while providing adequate protection and comfort during brief stops along travel routes. These shelters incorporated many of the same design principles used in permanent homes, but were engineered for portability and ease of construction, using materials that could be carried by traveling parties. The construction of temporary shelters was a community skill that allowed groups to establish comfortable camps quickly while conserving energy for continued travel. The logistics of Ice Age migrations involve careful planning that balanced the needs of all community members while ensuring that essential resources and knowledge were preserved during moves between seasonal camps. Elderly community members and young children required special consideration during these moves, with transportation methods and rest schedules adjusted to accommodate their needs. The distribution of responsibilities during migrations ensured that essential tasks were completed while allowing community members to contribute according to their abilities and experience. Communication systems developed during Ice Age migrations allowed scattered groups to maintain contact and coordinate their movements across vast distances and extended time periods. These systems included signal fires, smoke signals, and message systems that could relay information about weather conditions, resource availability, and potential hazards across networks of travelers and settled communities. The reliability of these communication systems was essential for maintaining social connections and ensuring the safety of traveling groups. The cultural practices associated with Ice Age migrations created ceremonies and traditions that strengthened community bonds while celebrating the successful completion of difficult journeys. Departure ceremonies prepared travelers spiritually and practically for the challenges ahead, while arrival celebrations welcomed groups to new territories and renewed social connections that had been maintained across seasons of separation. These cultural practices weren't just social activities, but served practical purposes by reinforcing the cooperation and mutual support that made successful migrations possible. The seasonal camps established by Ice Age communities were temporary settlements that provided all the comforts and conveniences of permanent homes, while remaining flexible enough to be abandoned when environmental conditions or resource availability changed. These camps were positioned to take advantage of seasonal resources like migrating animal herds, ripening plant foods, or favorable weather conditions while providing access to water, fuel, and materials needed for daily life. Resource management during seasonal migrations required sophisticated understanding of how to exploit temporary abundance while preparing for future needs and avoiding overuse that could damage the long-term productivity of seasonal territories. These management practices weren't just practical techniques, but reflected spiritual beliefs about the responsibility of humans to maintain the health and balance of the natural systems that supported their communities. The social dynamics of migrating communities created flexible leadership structures that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the cooperation and discipline necessary for successful group travel. Leadership during migrations often rotated among community members based on their knowledge of specific territories, weather conditions, or seasonal resources, creating systems that took advantage of specialized expertise while maintaining democratic decision-making processes. The educational aspects of Ice Age migrations provided young community members with intensive learning experiences that taught practical skills while deepening their understanding of natural systems and cultural traditions. These journeys were opportunities for hands-on education that couldn't be replicated in settled communities, with young people learning navigation, weather prediction, resource identification, and survival skills through direct experience under the guidance of knowledgeable adults. The technological innovations developed for Ice Age migrations created portable versions of tools and equipment that maintained functionality while reducing weight and bulk for traveling communities. These innovations required creative problem-solving that balanced the need for essential tools with the limitations imposed by human and animal carrying capacity. The resulting technologies were often more refined and efficient than their stationary counterparts, representing some of the most sophisticated engineering achievements of the Ice Age period. The trade relationships facilitated by Ice Age migrations created economic networks that stretched across continents and provided communities access to resources and technologies that weren't available in their local territories. These trade relationships weren't just economic arrangements, but were social and cultural exchanges that enriched communities through exposure to different ideas, techniques, and worldviews. The items traded weren't just practical goods, but included artistic works, ceremonial objects, and luxury items that enhanced the quality of life and social status of community members. The environmental knowledge accumulated through Ice Age migrations created detailed understanding of vast territories that included information about weather patterns, resource availability, terrain characteristics, and seasonal changes across hundreds or thousands of square miles. This knowledge was preserved through oral traditions that could be passed down through generations, creating mental maps of incredible accuracy and detail that guided communities safely across familiar and unfamiliar territories. The spiritual practices associated with Ice Age migrations recognized travel as sacred activity that connected communities to the natural world, while strengthening their relationships with ancestral spirits and natural forces. These practices included ceremonies for seeking protection during dangerous journeys, rituals for thanking natural spirits for safe passage, and celebrations that honored the successful completion of difficult travels. These spiritual aspects of migration weren't separate from practical considerations, but were integrated into all aspects of travel planning and execution. As these gentle facts about Ice Age mobility continue to unfold, we discover that movement and travel weren't desperate struggles against harsh conditions, but were sophisticated cultural practices that connected communities to vast territories while maintaining social relationships across enormous distances. The pace and planning of these migrations reflected the same patience and wisdom that characterized all aspects of Ice Age life. With communities moving deliberately across landscapes they understood intimately through generations of careful observation and respectful interaction. The return to familiar territories after seasonal migrations created homecoming celebrations that renewed community bonds while sharing the experiences and knowledge gained during periods of travel. These reunions weren't just social gatherings, but were opportunities for communities to integrate new information and experiences into their collective knowledge, while strengthening the relationships that held them together across seasons of separation. The joy and relief of these homecomings created some of the most meaningful and emotionally powerful experiences in Ice Age community life. The cyclical nature of Ice Age migrations created rhythms of movement and settlement that became deeply embedded in community culture and individual psychology, with the anticipation of seasonal travel providing structure and meaning to annual cycles of life. These patterns weren't just practical adaptations to environmental conditions, but became central elements of cultural identity that connected communities to their ancestors and to the natural world that sustained them. The memory of these ancient rhythms still echoes in modern human psychology, explaining our deep attraction to travel, our restlessness during certain seasons, and our profound satisfaction when we find ourselves moving through natural landscapes at a pace that allows us to truly see and experience the world around us. The preservation of knowledge during the Ice Age created educational systems that were both practical and profoundly spiritual, with learning taking place not in formal schools but through patient observation and gentle guidance that unfolded over years of careful mentorship. Children weren't rushed through predetermined curricula, but were allowed to develop their interests and abilities at natural paces that honored their individual gifts while ensuring they acquired all the skills necessary for community life. Master craftspeople, hunters, and healers took on apprentices not as burden but as investment in the future, understanding that the careful transmission of knowledge was one of their most important responsibilities to both their communities and the generations yet to come. The teaching methods used during this era recognized that different individuals learned in different ways and at different speeds, with mastering their instruction teachers adapt to match each student's natural learning style and pace of development. Some apprentices learned best through direct hands-on experience, while others needed detailed verbal explanation before attempting new skills. Still others learned through careful observation of masters at work, absorbing techniques and principles through patient watching before gradually beginning their own practice. These individualized approaches to education created learning environments where every student could succeed while developing their unique talents and perspectives. The testing and evaluation systems used in Ice Age education weren't based on competition or standardized measurements, but on gradual demonstration of competence and understanding that proved readiness for increased responsibility and independence. Students weren't failed or passed in arbitrary time frames, but were guided through progressively more challenging tasks until they had demonstrated complete mastery of essential skills. This approach to evaluation created confidence rather than anxiety, with learners knowing that they would receive support and guidance for as long as necessary to achieve genuine competence. The relationship between teachers and students during the Ice Age was characterized by mutual respect and genuine affection rather than authority and submission. Master teachers understood that their role was to guide and support rather than control, creating learning environments where students felt safe to ask questions, make mistakes, and explore their own interests within the framework of essential knowledge. These relationships often lasted for decades, with former students maintaining connection with their teachers long after achieving independence, and often becoming teachers themselves who carried forward the same patient and supportive approaches to education. The celebration of achievement during Ice Age education created meaningful recognition. Hoo-ha for students mastered important skills while encouraging continued learning and development throughout adult life. These celebrations weren't competitive events that created winners and losers, but were community gatherings that honored the dedication and progress of all learners, while strengthening social bonds and cultural continuity. The achievement of competence in essential skills like toolmaking, hunting, healing, or storytelling was recognized with ceremonies that acknowledged not just individual accomplishment, but the collective investment of teachers and community members who had supported the learning process. The integration of spiritual and practical education during the Ice Age created learning experiences that addressed not just technical skills, but the moral and ethical dimensions of knowledge that guided how skills should be used for the benefit of community and natural world. Students learned not just how to hunt, but when hunting was appropriate, and how to honor the animals that gave their lives for human sustenance. They learned not just how to make tools, but how to select materials respectfully and how to create implements that would serve their communities for generations rather than being quickly discarded. The documentation of knowledge during the Ice Age relied on human memory and oral tradition rather than written records, creating educational systems that emphasize deep understanding and personal relationship with information rather than superficial memorization. Students were expected to truly comprehend the principles behind techniques and practices rather than simply copying procedures they didn't fully understand. This approach to knowledge preservation created individuals who could adapt their skills to new situations and solve problems creatively rather than merely following predetermined formulas. The seasonal aspects of Ice Age education recognize that different types of learning were appropriate during different times of year, with summer months devoted to active skill development and travel experiences, while winter periods focused on reflection, storytelling, and the deeper contemplation of spiritual and philosophical aspects of knowledge. This seasonal rhythm of education matched the natural cycles of human energy and attention, while ensuring that learning remained engaging and effective throughout the year. The community involvement in Ice Age education created support networks where every adult had responsibility for guiding and teaching young people, ensuring that essential knowledge was preserved even if individual teachers were lost to illness or accident. Children learned from multiple mentors who each contributed their specialized knowledge and perspective, creating educational experiences that were rich and varied while maintaining consistency in essential principles and values. This distributed approach to education also ensured that different learning styles and interests were supported by teachers who were naturally suited to work with particular types of students. The gradual transition from student to teacher during Ice Age education created seamless continuity in knowledge transmission, while providing new teachers with extended periods of guidance and support as they developed their own teaching skills. Advanced students began teaching younger learners while still receiving instruction from master teachers, creating multi-level educational systems where knowledge flowed in all directions and everyone had opportunities to both learn and teach. This approach to education recognized that teaching was itself a skill that required practice and development, rather than something that automatically came with expertise in other areas. The specialization of knowledge during the Ice Age allowed communities to develop expertise in different areas, while maintaining the cross-training that ensured essential skills weren't lost if specialists were unavailable. Some individuals became master hunters who understood animal behavior and tracking techniques with extraordinary depth, while others specialized in plant knowledge that encompassed not just food sources but medicines, materials, and spiritual uses of botanical resources. Still others became experts in weather prediction, tool making, artistic expression, or spiritual practices that connected communities to natural and supernatural forces. The preservation of cultural knowledge during the Ice Age created educational systems that transmitted not just practical skills, but the stories, songs, ceremonies, and beliefs that gave meaning and identity to community life. These cultural elements weren't taught as separate subjects, but were integrated into all aspects of education, with practical instruction always including the cultural context that explained why particular techniques were important and how they connected to larger systems of meaning and value. This integration of practical and cultural education created individuals who understood not just how to do things, but why they were worth doing and how their actions connected to the welfare of their communities and the natural world. The innovation and creativity encouraged in Ice Age education created learning environments where students were expected not just to master existing knowledge, but to contribute their own insights and improvements to traditional techniques and practices. Teachers recognized that each generation brought new perspectives and abilities that could enhance and refine inherited wisdom, creating educational systems that balanced respect for tradition with openness to innovation and change. This approach to education ensured that knowledge remained alive and dynamic rather than becoming rigid doctrine that couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. The healing arts during the Ice Age developed into sophisticated medical systems that combined detailed knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology with spiritual practices that address the emotional and social dimensions of health and illness. Healers underwent extensive training that could span decades, learning not just which plants and treatments were effective for particular conditions, but how to diagnose underlying causes of illness and how to support patients' own healing processes rather than simply treating symptoms. These medical practitioners understood that healing required not just technical intervention, but the creation of conditions that supported the body's natural tendency toward health and balance. The diagnostic techniques used by Ice Age healers relied on careful observation of subtle signs and symptoms that revealed not just what was wrong, but why illness had occurred and what changes were needed to restore health. These healers could read information from skin color, breathing patterns, posture, voice quality, and energy levels that provided detailed pictures of patients' overall condition and constitution. They understood that symptoms were often expressions of deeper imbalances that required attention to diet, lifestyle, emotional state, and spiritual well-being rather than just physical treatment. The treatment methods developed during the Ice Age combined herbal medicines with massage, energy work, dietary changes, and lifestyle modifications that addressed illness from multiple angles, while supporting the patient's overall vitality and resistance to future health problems. These treatments were gentle and gradual rather than aggressive, working with natural healing processes rather than overwhelming them with dramatic interventions. Healers understood that recovery took time and that pushing patients too hard or too fast could actually delay healing or create new problems. The preparation of herbal medicines during the Ice Age was itself a sacred art that required not just knowledge of plant properties, but understanding of how to gather, process, and combine materials in ways that maximize their healing potential while minimizing any harmful effects. Healers knew when to harvest different plants for maximum potency, how to dry and store them to preserve their active compounds, and how to prepare combinations that worked synergistically to address complex health conditions. The preparation process often included ceremonies and prayers that were believed to enhance the spiritual power of medicines, while connecting healers to natural forces that supported healing. The patient care provided by Ice Age healers extended far beyond medical treatment to include emotional support, counseling, and practical assistance that helped individuals and families cope with illness while maintaining their connections to community life. Healers understood that isolation and despair could be as damaging as physical symptoms, creating treatment approaches that kept patients engaged with their communities while providing the rest and care they needed for recovery. Family members and friends were often included in healing processes, creating support networks that strengthened both patients and their loved ones during difficult times. The prevention focus of Ice Age medicine emphasized maintaining health through lifestyle practices that supported vitality and resistance to illness rather than waiting for problems to develop before providing treatment. Healers taught community members about nutrition, exercise, stress management, and spiritual practices that promoted long-term health, while helping individuals recognize early signs of imbalance that could be addressed before they developed into serious illness. This preventive approach to medicine created healthier communities while reducing the burden of serious illness that required intensive treatment. The surgical techniques developed during the Ice Age were remarkably sophisticated procedures that could address injuries and conditions that would have been fatal without intervention. Yet these operations were performed with care and precision that minimized trauma while maximizing chances of successful recovery. Ice Age surgeons understood anatomy with extraordinary detail and had developed instruments and techniques that could perform complex procedures with minimal damage to surrounding tissues. The recovery care provided after surgical procedures include prevention and rehabilitation, pain management, infection health, understanding of Ice Age heal, the mental that helped patients return to full function, spiritual well-being, where INSERS recognized that emotional and treatment approaches that addressed psychological separable from physical health. Creating healers understood that grief, the same care and attention given distress with to physical ailments. These anger and despy fear could manifest to underlying. They developed that lasting as physical symptoms, antimatic relief, healing required attention, emotional causes rather than just symptoming their sense of meaning, counseling techniques, and therapeutic practices that helped individuals of new healers during the Ice Age was process difficult experiences while rebuilding training and connection to community life. The guidance of master practitioners who had formal instruction with hands and intensive process that combines on experience under the healers spent years learning to the healing arts. Students had devoted their lives to understanding, identify, and prepare medicines, developing the observational skills needed for accurate diagnosis, and practicing the gentle touch and compassionate presence that were essential elements of effective healing. This training wasn't just technical education, but included spiritual development that prepared healers to serve their communities with wisdom, humility, and genuine care for the welfare of their patients. The integration of healing practices with daily life during the Ice Age created communities where health-promoting activities were woven into normal routines rather than being separate medical interventions that were only used when problems developed. Community meals emphasized foods that supported health and vitality. Work activities were organized to promote fitness and prevent injury. And social practices included stress reduction techniques and emotional support systems that maintained psychological well-being. This integration of healing and daily life created environments where health was the natural result of wise living rather than something that required constant medical intervention. As these gentle revelations about Ice Age healing continue to unfold, we discover medical systems that were based on deep understanding of human nature and natural healing processes rather than aggressive intervention and symptom suppression. The pace of healing during this era allowed for complete recovery that addressed underlying causes rather than just surface problems, creating approaches to health and medicine that supported not just survival, but genuine vitality and well-being. These ancient healing wisdom traditions offer quiet lessons that remain relevant today, suggesting that true health comes not from fighting against illness, but from creating conditions that support the body's natural tendency toward balance, strength, and vitality. The artistic expressions of Ice Age communities reveal minds that had abundant time for creative exploration and spiritual contemplation, with art serving not just as decoration but as communication with natural and supernatural forces that shaped community life. Cave paintings weren't hasty sketches but carefully planned compositions that took months or years to complete, with artists returning again and again to add layers of meaning and beauty to works that served as focal points for community ceremonies and individual meditation. These artistic works were created in the deepest, most acoustically perfect chambers of caves, suggesting they were intended not just for viewing, but for creating immersive spiritual experiences that connected viewers to the living energy of the earth itself. The pigments used in Ice Age art were carefully prepared from materials that had been gathered from sacred locations and processed through techniques that required deep understanding of mineral properties and chemical interactions. Artists would travel great distances to obtain specific colors, with some pigments requiring months of preparation before they were ready for use. The resulting colors were incredibly durable and vibrant, maintaining their intensity for thousands of years, while creating visual effects that seemed to bring painted animals to life in the flickering light of torches and oil lamps. Chosen for Ice Age art weren't random, the subject depictions, but were carefully selected images that held deep spiritual and cultural significance for the communities that created them. Animals weren't just represented as they appeared in daily life, but were shown in ways that revealed their spiritual essence and their role in the cosmic order that governed natural cycles. Human figures were often shown in transformation states that suggested spiritual journeys or shamanic experiences, while abstract symbols represented concepts and forces that couldn't be captured in realistic imagery. The techniques used in Ice Age art demonstrate sophisticated understanding of visual perception and artistic composition that created works of stunning beauty and emotional power. Artists understood how to use the natural contours of cave walls to give dimensionality to painted figures, creating three-dimensional effects that made animals appear to step out of the stone itself. They developed shading and highlighting techniques that gave depth and realism to their work while using color combinations that created specific moods and emotional responses in viewers. The social aspects of Ice Age art creation brought communities together for collaborative projects that strengthened cultural bonds, while preserving and transmitting important spiritual and practical knowledge. Large artistic works were often community efforts that involved multiple artists working together over extended periods, with different individuals contributing their specialized skills to create unified compositions that represented collective vision and shared meaning. These collaborative projects weren't just artistic endeavors, but were spiritual practices that connected participants to ancestral traditions and natural forces. The preservation of artistic knowledge during the Ice Age created teaching traditions that passed complex techniques and cultural meanings from master artists to apprentices through patient instruction and careful practice. Student artists spent years learning to prepare pigments, understand cave acoustics and lighting, and develop the spiritual sensitivity that was considered essential for creating works that serve ceremonial and religious purposes. This artistic education wasn't just technical training, but included spiritual development that prepared artists to serve their communities as bridges between the everyday world and the realm of spirits and natural forces. The musical traditions of Ice Age communities created soundscapes that complemented and enhanced visual art while serving as independent forms of spiritual and cultural expression. Flutes carved from mammoth bones produced haunting melodies that could carry for miles across open landscapes, serving as communication tools as well as entertainment and ceremonial instruments. Drums made from stretched hides created rhythms that matched the slow pulse of Ice Age life, while providing accompaniment for dances and ceremonies that could last for days. The acoustic properties of Ice Age performance spaces were carefully studied and utilized to create immersive sound experiences that transported participants into altered states of consciousness where spiritual insight and community bonding could occur. Caves were chosen not just for their visual properties, but for their acoustic characteristics, with musicians positioning themselves in natural amphitheaters where their music would resonate and amplify in ways that created powerful emotional and spiritual responses in listeners. The dance traditions of Ice Age communities combined physical expression with spiritual practice, creating performances that told stories while inducing trance states that connected dancers and observers to natural and supernatural forces. These dances weren't casual entertainment, but were carefully choreographed ceremonies that required years of training and spiritual preparation. Dancers wore elaborate costumes and masks that transformed them into animal spirits or mythological beings, creating theatrical experiences that brought sacred stories to life while strengthening community connections to cultural traditions. The storytelling arts of Ice Age peoples created vast oral libraries that preserved not just practical knowledge, but the myths, legends, and spiritual teachings that gave meaning and identity to community life. Master storytellers trained for decades to memorize thousands of tales, each one carefully crafted to teach specific lessons while providing entertainment that could hold audiences spellbound for hours. These stories weren't just recited, but were performed with elaborate gestures, voice changes, and dramatic pauses that brought characters and events to life in the minds of listeners. The integration of different art forms during Ice Age cultural events created multimedia experiences that combined visual art, music, dance, and storytelling into unified celebrations that engaged all the senses while creating powerful emotional and spiritual impacts on participants. These integrated performances weren't just entertainment, but were transformative experiences that could change participants' understanding of themselves and their place in the natural and spiritual worlds. The seasonal aspects of Ice Age artistic expression recognized that different types of creative work were appropriate during different times of year, with summer months devoted to gathering materials and creating portable art, while winter periods focused on cave painting, sculpture, and the intensive storytelling and musical performances that strengthened community bonds during months of indoor living. This seasonal rhythm of artistic activity matched the natural cycles of inspiration and reflection, while ensuring that creative work remained an integral part of community life throughout the year. The spiritual dimensions of Ice Age art created works that served not just as decoration, but as tools for meditation, prayer, and communication with forces beyond the everyday world. Artists understood that their creations could serve as doorways between different realms of existence, creating works that facilitated spiritual journeys and mystical experiences for viewers who approached them with appropriate reverence and preparation. These spiritual aspects of art weren't separate from aesthetic considerations, but were integrated into all aspects of artistic creation, with beauty serving as a vehicle for transcendent experience. The trade aspects of Ice Age art created networks of cultural exchange that spread artistic techniques and spiritual practices across vast distances, while providing communities with access to materials and ideas that weren't available in their local territories. Artistic works weren't just local creations, but were valuable trade items that carried cultural information and spiritual power from one community to another. These trade relationships facilitated the development of shared artistic traditions that connected distant for local communities, while allowing variations that reflected unique cultural identities and environmental conditions. As these gentle insights into Ice Age creativity continue to emerge, we discover artistic traditions that were deeply integrated into all aspects of community life, rather than being separate activities pursued only by specialized artists. The patience and time available during this era allowed for artistic development that created works of extraordinary beauty and spiritual power, while serving practical functions that strengthened community bonds and preserved essential cultural knowledge. These ancient approaches to creativity offer quiet lessons that remain relevant today, suggesting that art serves not just aesthetic purposes, but fulfills deep human needs for meaning, connection, and transcendence that can transform both individual lives and community relationships. The children of the Ice Age grew up in a world where learning happened through gentle observation and patient practice, with education unfolding at the natural pace of human development rather than being rushed through artificial schedules. Young ones weren't hurried into adult responsibilities, but were allowed to explore their interests and abilities through play that gradually transformed into skilled work as their minds and bodies matured. The games children played weren't separate from practical education, but were carefully designed activities that taught essential survival skills, while providing the joy and laughter that made learning memorable and meaningful. Toy making during the Ice Age was a sophisticated craft that created miniature versions of adult tools and implements that allowed children to practice important skills in safe, scaled-down environments. These toys weren't crude approximations, but were carefully crafted implements that functioned like their full-sized counterparts, while being perfectly suited to small hands and developing coordination. Wooden spears the size of pencils allowed young hunters to practice their throwing techniques, while tiny scrapers and knives taught the proper grip and motion needed for hide preparation and food processing. The games played by Ice Age children often involved entire communities, with adults participating in activities that strengthened intergenerational bonds while providing opportunities for subtle instruction and guidance. Hide-and-seek games taught stalking and camouflage techniques that would be essential for successful hunting, while racing and climbing competitions developed the physical fitness and agility needed for travel across challenging terrain. Strategy games played with carved pieces on boards scratched into the earth developed the planning and decision-making abilities that would be crucial for resource management and community leadership. The mentorship relationships formed between Ice Age children and skilled adults created educational partnerships that lasted for years and provided individualized instruction that matched each child's natural interests and abilities. These weren't formal teacher-student arrangements, but were organic relationships that developed as children gravitated toward adults whose work fascinated them and who showed patience and enthusiasm for sharing their knowledge. A child drawn to the rhythmic sounds of stone knapping might spend hours sitting beside an expert toolmaker, gradually progressing from observer to helper to independent practitioner under gentle guidance. Coming-of-age ceremonies during the Ice Age marked important transitions in young people's lives with celebrations that recognized their growing competence while welcoming them into adult responsibilities and privileges. These ceremonies weren't arbitrary markers based on chronological age, but were earned recognition of demonstrated skills and maturity that showed readiness for greater independence and community contribution. The preparations for these ceremonies often took months and involved the entire community in activities that tested not just practical abilities, but also character, wisdom, and commitment to community values. The initiation processes associated with Ice Age coming of age included vision quests and spiritual journeys that connected young people to natural forces and ancestral spirits, while providing opportunities for self-discovery and personal growth. These weren't dangerous ordeals designed to prove toughness, but were carefully supervised experiences that challenge participants to discover their inner strength and spiritual connection, while remaining safe under the watchful protection of experienced guides. The visions and insights gained during these journeys often provided direction for adult roles and specializations within the community. The celebration feasts that concluded Ice Age coming-of-age ceremonies brought entire communities together for elaborate meals that featured the finest foods available while creating opportunities for storytelling, music, and dance that strengthened cultural bonds and welcomed new adults into full community membership. These feasts weren't just parties, but were sacred celebrations that honored the investment the community had made in raising each young person, while acknowledging their readiness to contribute their unique gifts and abilities to community life. The gift-giving traditions associated with Ice Age coming-of-age ceremonies created meaningful exchanges that provided new adults with the tools and resources they needed for independent life, while strengthening relationships between families and community members. These gifts weren't casual presents, but were carefully chosen items that reflected the recipient's interests and abilities, while carrying blessings and good wishes from the entire community. A skilled toolmaker might receive specially selected stones for knapping, while a promising healer might be given rare plants and prepared medicines to start their own practice. The marriage customs of Ice Age communities created partnerships that were based on mutual affection and compatibility, while strengthening alliances between family groups and ensuring the continuation of cultural traditions. These weren't arranged marriages imposed by authority, but were relationships that developed naturally through community interactions, and were celebrated only when both partners demonstrated genuine commitment to each other and readiness for the responsibilities of family life. The courtship process often lasted for years and included opportunities for couples to work together on community projects that revealed their compatibility and shared values. The wedding ceremonies of the Ice Age were elaborate celebrations that could last for weeks and involved extended family groups and festivities that honored not just the union of two individuals, but the joining of kinship networks and the continuation of genetic and cultural lines. These ceremonies weren't brief exchanges of vows, but were extended rituals that included gift exchanges, storytelling sessions, musical performances, and elaborate feasts that strengthened community bonds while celebrating the creation of new family units. The family structures that emerged from Ice Age marriages were flexible arrangements that could adapt to changing circumstances while providing security and support for all family members. These weren't rigid hierarchies based on gender or age, but were cooperative partnerships where responsibilities were shared according to individual abilities and interests rather than predetermined roles. Children benefited from multiple caregivers and role models, while adults found support and companionship that helped them cope with the challenges and uncertainties of life in demanding environments. The child-rearing practices of Ice Age families created nurturing environments that supported healthy development while preparing young people for the skills and knowledge they would need as adults. Parents weren't solely responsible for raising their children, but were part of extended networks that included grandparents, aunts, uncles, and family friends, who all contributed to children's education and development. This distributed approach to parenting ensured that children received varied perspectives and instruction while providing backup support if parents were unable to fulfill their responsibilities due to illness or accident. The elder care traditions of Ice Age communities created honored roles for older experience, while providing the adults that recognized their wisdom and support and assistance they needed to remain comfortable and engaged in community life. Elders weren't seen as burdens, but were treasured repositories of knowledge and cultural memory, whose contributions were essential for community survival and prosperity. Their physical needs were met with the same care and attention given to children, while their intellectual and spiritual gifts were sought out and celebrated by community members of all ages. And so our gentle journey through the Ice Age draws to a close, like the last notes of that ancient symphony we've been listening to together. We've drifted through frozen millennia and discovered a world that was not harsh or desperate, but patient and wise, where communities thrived through cooperation rather than conquest, where adaptation happened through grace rather than struggle, and where even the coldest times held warmth for those who knew how to find it. These nearly 50 facts have carried us from mammoth steppes to cozy shelters, from the slow formation of glaciers to the quick spark of creativity around winter fires. Each revelation has whispered the same quiet truth that there are other ways to live, other rhythms to follow, and that prosperity comes not from rushing forward, but from moving with the natural pace of the world around us. As you settle into rest tonight, perhaps you'll carry with you the memory of woolly mammoths grazing peacefully across endless grasslands, or the image of early humans gathered around glowing hearths, sharing stories that would echo across thousands of years. These ancient rhythms still flow through our modern world, waiting for us to slow down enough to hear them, to remember that we too are part of this long, patient story that began in ice and continues in us. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle giants and quiet wonders of our shared past.